Hey guys, this is Nick here with What Game Now. We are back with another miniature game overview, and today we are going to talk about a game called Dropzone Commander. A bit of history about them before we get going. Dropzone Commander came out in 2000, and I believe it was around 13-ish. Originally by a company called Hawk War Games. They came out with a second edition in 2018-ish. They ended up being bought out by TTCombat, who is now the current producer and maker of the game. It is a 10mm scale sci-fi combat game. It's not a skirmish game. You are dealing with army scale. But because of the size of the miniatures and the size of the board, it's actually not a lot of stuff, and we'll talk about it as we get going. So, without further ado, let us go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk about the universe, and we're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics here. Not super deep. We are going to try and get a gameplay demo going. Don't actually have the miniatures in yet, so those need to be acquired, painted, and assembled, but we'll get to that. Let's talk about the universe and a little bit about the game, though. So Dropzone Commander is set in the future, if you didn't get that by the sci-fi. It is our future. This isn't some alternate history scenario or alternate universe. Humanity has expanded to various planets and solar systems, has a pretty thriving empire. They've met alien races. Things haven't gone too bad until one particular alien race showed up called the Scourge. The Scourge essentially struck without warning. There was no contact, there was no diplomacy, and in mere days, human civilization was brought to complete collapse. Militarily, they were not prepared, and a lot of their stuff was outdated. The Scourge just wiped the floor with them. The survivors fled to the frontier worlds, blew up the transport gates behind them so the Scourge couldn't find them, and rebuilt. We pick up here 160 years later, where the UCM, we'll talk about who that is in a moment, is launching a massive counterattack to retake the lost human worlds. This is kind of an interesting twist on the alien invasion scenario because the humans have already lost, which is kind of cool. So I mentioned the UCM. That stands for the United Colonies of Mankind. This is the human entity that is formed after the Scourge invasion. They are formed by primarily frontier worlds, highly rich in minerals. They have their local populations plus what made it out after the fact. I think it's somewhere around 20 billion people make it up. It is a highly militarized state devoted to reconquering humanity. It's essentially been in a state of total war for 160 years. Their military, I think, is around 100 million soldiers, so pretty significant army. And you can see this is the day they launched their invasion or got ready for it. There's a parade of these dropships hauling these vehicles by. Design-wise, the UCM favors practical utilitarian designs. If you go back to the last slide, the tank you saw there was a human UCM tank. Somewhat lower tech, but easy to produce in large numbers, easy to maintain, gets the job done. Visually on the tabletop, you're going to see lots of traditional combat vehicles. We'll have a picture of their army box here in a little bit. Opposed to them is the Scourge. Now, the Scourge are actually a parasite. They invade a host, they take over the host, and they live inside the host until the host dies. Humanity was next on the menu. But it is worth noting that the other races have been taken by the Scourge. The Scourge can take over non-intelligent races. The Razorworms stand out. They can take over intelligent races. And collectively, this makes up the Scourge. They have dug in on these human worlds. It's presumed that the reason they were there was solely to basically take over humanity and get more hosts. They have taken over the human worlds, essentially made them their own. Because they're using humans as their main host, a lot of the human stuff is allowed to survive because it's designed for humans. And on the battlefield, you're going to see a meld of machine and living creatures with a focus on short-range weapons. You can actually look at that picture there. That's some Scourge infantry coming out of an APC. You can see the little glowing eyes on the APC. I believe there's a Scourge in there. That's actually the APC. Again, I apologize. I don't 100% have the book here, so don't quote me on the intricacies. It's just this is the sales pitch that we're going off of to get excited for it. Next up, we have the PHR. It stands for the Post-Human Republic. This is a society of cyborgs, essentially, and augmented humans, advised by something called the White Sphere. Their ancestors are blamed by the UCM for being one of the reasons the Scourge invasion succeeded. And that's because the White Sphere, which is literally a white sphere, landed on Earth. Through a series of shenanigans, eventually they realized it's essentially an AI, or at least it appears to be an AI, warned humanity that something was coming. Anybody who wanted to get out had to go to a certain location at a certain time. These are the people that did that. Now, this was a very rushed and not exactly pleasant exodus, so there was a shooting war around the actual leaving part of it. That turned the human fleet from this, Goliath juggernaut to, something that had taken a lot of damage and just couldn't stand up to the Scourge. Now, based off how their ground forces handled, I don't think they would have really helped that much. But they have been blamed for essentially the defeat humanity suffered. Just prior to this UCM's return of hostilities, they appeared, told them this is a bad idea. The UCM's humans said, nope, we're doing this. And the two are now antagonists. No one's 100% sure what the PHR is doing. Sometimes they're attacking the UCM, sometimes they're helping them. They're not friends, so it's a little bit confused. On the tabletop, the PHR, you're going to see combat walkers, nanomachines, almost symbiotic machine-human relations. They actually have a unit called the Medusa, I think it's the Medusa, which is literally just a massive swarm of nanomachines controlled by one person. We have the Shaotari. So this is an alien race humanity had actually contacted before the Scourge. It's the only one I can think of that's been mentioned. It's the only one with a tabletop presence. There might be more. They're not super large individually, but they're that stereotypical advanced to the point of appearing near magical. What's interesting is while they are very calm and intelligent, they have a warlike tendency. They tend to get their bloodlust going pretty good. So they're actually split into clans that are fighting amongst each other. Some are allied with the UCM, some are not, some are allied with the PHR. Interesting note, they can't technically die. When they die, they can just download to a new consciousness, or their consciousness to a new body. And on the tabletop, you're going to see anti-grav vehicles, sleek, spindly walkers, like what you can see there. Compare that to the PHR walkers, which are a little bit chunkier. And unlike the other factions use dropships to move their troops around. The Shaotari use warp gates. So they actually gate in troops. So it's got this kind of mix Eldar Protoss feel from StarCraft. And then the last faction I want to mention is the Resistance, the only 5 that we have in the game right now. The Resistance, to the surprise of the UCM, not all humans were wiped out by the Scourge. The Scourge kind of took the cities and the nice areas and left other areas alone for the most part. There, humanity was able to survive and in some cases even thrive. Now, because of that disparate, kind of still on the edge of apocalypse nature, the Resistance is roughly divided into feral groups, and then the somewhat civilized entities. Some of them can be hostile, others are almost nation states unto themselves. Some are allied with the UCM, some are enemies out for their own good, some are allying with the PHR. It's complete chaos because of how divided they are. It's not one entity, they're more local movements. Tech-wise, they tend to use salvaged pre-invasion technology, so you'll actually see some pretty chunky tanks and attack helicopters and things like that in them, alongside salvaged vehicles, like this picture right here. You can see some salvaged ATVs with a gun strapped to it. The next photo is another Resistance unit, and it's actually a full-on attack helicopter, because this is that pre-invasion tech, so they've got that kind of split dynamic there. One of their units is a giant hovercraft, like the LCACs that the US uses, or the little hover landing vehicles. They're not little; they can haul a couple tanks, but those things. All right, let's talk some gameplay here. It's an alternating activation game. Instead of unit by unit, it's by what's called battle group. I'm trying to think of what we played. It has a very heavy gear styling to it, or it feels a lot like heavy gear. Where, all right, it's your turn. You're going to go with a portion of your army. And that army construction works kind of like older 40k editions, where, okay, you have a table of organization for each battle group. It needs X number of these, X number of these, X number of these. Actually, it's probably closer to 8th edition 40k. And then those are what you alternate activating. So you'll have a headquarters battle group, you'll have a frontline battle group or something. And each of those battle groups has a list of, okay, well, you can have up to this many of these, you need at least this many of these. You build your army around that. What I want to focus on in this game, though, and this is something that you need to be aware of if you're looking at this, is it is a very transport-focused game. I saw somebody who was complaining about how they really didn't like it because their troops were so slow. The idea is you put them in a dropship and you move them. The units are slow, A, because that's mostly realistic. How fast can an infantryman actually move? And then what they're trying to get you to do is to use transports and air mobility to move your forces around the battlefield. If anybody's ever played an old Command and Conquer game, it has a feel like that, where the units on the ground are very slow. It's about strategic decisions as opposed to micromanagement. It's about putting the right forces in the right place. You're not going to be able to move a ton once you're there unless you get back in the dropship. One thing I do like is the rules are fairly short. They're longer than Heavy Gear, but not by a ton. The rulebook length reminds me a lot of Monster Apocalypse, if you include all the force construction stuff in Heavy Gear around that length. The wording isn't bad. It's a little sus in some areas. I think there's some room for improvement. But one thing I also do like is there's not a lot of special rules. You know, you look at a game like Heavy Gear has pages and pages of traits. 40K seems like every model has 15 rules. These are very clean, very concise. If you look at the actual unit entries, they're very clean, very simple. Personally, my only issue that I have with the system so far is it does use true line of sight. If you've watched any of our previous videos, you know I have issues with that. What I will give them here, and it's something I want to harp on with the miniatures are true scale, so they're all to scale with each other, and there aren't any showy poses. Everything is as you would reasonably expect to see it on the battlefield, which does help my complaint against true line of sight, because it's at least being consistent with itself. It's saying, okay, well, we're going to play this realistic. The miniatures are going to look realistic to the universe. Couple other things. The book is released using an expansion book format, so no codexes. The rules are free, the fluff is not, so okay, that's fine. But there's expansion books, so there's the core rule book, and then they're on their third expansion book, Reconquest Phase 1, Reconquest Phase 2, Battle for Earth. There's a command card system to help make commanders feel impactful, aside from I'm Billy Badass with super powerful mech. The company TTCombat also does sell terrain in the form of MDF terrain. The miniatures are resin and plastic. I don't think there's any metal in the range, but don't quote me on that. And like I said, free rules and a functional online army builder. It's not perfect, but at least it works, which is better than GW. Alright, let's talk models here. I take that back. GW's Army Construction System does... Well, no, it's not actually in their app yet. So, yeah, okay. So let's talk about some models here. So, working our way from the top left, going clockwise, we have the Resistance, is that top left picture. You can see in the back of the picture, or towards the top, you have actual tanks and aircraft. They're kind of chunky, they're kind of big. You look down, you have that converted... kind of like combat trucks. So it's this mix of Mad Max, post-apocalyptic. To their right, we have the PHR, post-humans, sleek mecha designs. You got APCs, you've got armored infantry. That's the guys I'm going to be playing. Next image over is the 2-player starter. It's cut off a little bit. I apologize. I want to get all of them on one picture here. It is a reduced starter for each of the Scourge and UCM factions for a little bit more. It's got 2 armies in it. Comes with a rule book. It's an interesting note with that the 2-player starter, you can fork out an extra, it's 10 British pounds, which is like $14 US right now, to get cardstock terrain with it. And the cardstock terrain is beautiful. Really beautiful, and it's a lot. It's enough for a 6x4 table, if I recall right. Hopping over one, we have the Shaotari over in the top right. The Shaotari, you can see those things on the top. Those are the gates, so their units kind of just warp in on the battlefield. Continuing down, bottom left, we have the Scourge. That's their starter box. The starters are all plastic and resin. I know, I think the tanks, dropships, and infantry are resin, but there's this walker in the center bottom of that picture. I think he's resin. The little floaty thing to his top left is resin. And then the UCM starter. And you can see right there that really actual somewhat realistic military tech. And like I said, interesting note here, all of the miniatures actually fit in the dropships. The Scourge, their vehicles are nice, low and flat. They stack up on the dropships. So if you look, you can actually see a little, almost a shelf for them. The UCM ones, the idea is the dropships, they have these two side booms that kind of just clunk in around the vehicle. The tank turrets actually fold down to make the tank nice, low, and flat, so you can put a ton of them in a transport. The PHR, if you look at them, they all have this like little round circle on top that clunks into a section under the dropship. So everything fits, and that's really cool. It's all true scale, so it still feels all correct. Interesting note that I thought was kind of cool with the system is a lot of weapons have an infinite range. Not because it's literally infinite, but because its range is further than the table. And that's a cool little detail that I really appreciate. Interesting note that I want to point out, they don't come with the cards, which I thought was a little strange, especially in the starter box. Like, I thought just the 2 sets of the cards or however many you need would be there, but I guess not. So there's a look at the models. We've talked a little bit about the rules. Hopefully it won't be too long before we can get an actual video battle on the channel. I know Monpok is happening first, and I'm still waiting on miniatures here. Side note: if you're in the U.S., Golden Distribution is the one that carries this, and Golden is not a common one for a lot of companies. They're big enough that a lot of companies can get in with them pretty easily, but a lot of game shops don't have a Golden account to start with. So my local shop is getting a Golden account, and they're going to order me essentially one of everything you see on this picture here, probably plus the books and a couple card decks. So just get everything in one go. So with that, guys, go through the pictures again just to show kind of some stuff off. Really looking forward to this. I actually bought their original starter when they first came out. It's a cool system. It reminds me of what I think 40K kind of feels like it should be. You can see in the picture here that the dropship's actually holding stuff. It's kind of cool. The Scourge dropship's in that center back. You can see the tanks just stacked up on it. They actually do that with the physical models. Enough gushing, guys. This has been Nick with What Game Now. I'll catch you later.
Hey, this is Dave. If you like what we're doing here at What Game Now, go ahead and click on one of the videos which should be on either side of me, or click right in the middle and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell once you subscribe so that you know when we have new videos. Please go ahead and share us with your friends. Let everybody know that we're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for all of our subscribers already. And we look forward to bringing you more content every chance that we get.